And hello everybody, my name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you as always on the show today. Fresh comments coming in from President Joe Biden about all the things related to Israel and Rafah. He has said for the first time he may be holding on to some of the weapons that he has already pledged to send to Israel, depending on the nature of the impending or really ongoing Israeli invasion of Rafah at the moment. Some really major stuff as we give you all the updates from the region here to start the show. We'll also give you some takeaways as some public school leaders rebuffed some Republican attacks on how they had handled anti-Semitism from California, Maryland, and New York. Some pretty interesting stuff as they really struck a contrast. They were actually well media trained, unlike some of the university leaders who were in front of this, these House committees in trying to grill them and catch them for not being sufficiently pro-Israel in their schools. Also, Speaker Mike Johnson has survived after the Democrats voted to save him. We'll break that down. I'll give you my take on that, and I'll tell you why Republicans are out there voting to Democrats are trying to vote to save somebody who is rampantly pro-life, rampantly pro-Donald Trump. Love the January 6th riots when they happen, all for the name of more money for foreign wars, which are their true priorities. And this is kind of more in the if we have time department, but Biden is looking to thwart a surge of Chinese imports, proposing new barriers to Chinese electric vehicles, steel, and other goods in an attempt to protect his manufacturing agenda. All right. So we get started with this. Some pretty important stuff. We are going to go through it and essentially react to this clip. I have not seen this. I just got this here as we started the show. This is President Biden with CNN's Aaron Burnett about all things Israel. Let's take a listen.
I want to ask you about something happening as we sit here and speak, and that, of course, is Israel is striking Rafah. I know that you have paused, Mr. President, shipments of 2,000-pound U.S. bombs to Israel due to concern that they could be used in any offensive on Rafah. Have those bombs, those powerful 2,000-pound bombs, been used to kill civilians in Gaza?
Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers.
So first of all, that is a very, very big moment. So we have the 200,000-pound bombs. First of all, Biden not saying anything to some of the reports that have been coming from the Israeli side about why they've been held up, which is apparently some concerns over Rafah. And again, this kind of back and forth about what constitutes, as we talked about on the show yesterday, what constitutes a surgical strike, which is okay with the U.S., and what constitutes a full military operation, which the U.S. has said time and time again that they do not support. But then, not only do we have that, but Biden essentially comes in and says civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs, talking about American 2,000-pound bombs they have suspended, and in other ways they go after population centers. And I made it clear, if they go into Rafah, they haven't gotten into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying. All right, let's just play the rest of what he said. It's kind of a back and forth, but whatever.
I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells.
So, just to understand what they're doing right now in Rafah, is that not going into Rafah as you define it yet?
They haven't gone into the population centers. What they did is right on the border, and it's causing problems with right now in terms of with Egypt, which I've worked very hard to make sure we have a relationship and help. But I've made it clear to Bibi and the War Cabinet, they're not going to get our support if, in fact, they go in these population centers.
Yeah, so a pretty big moment there's really drawing the line of we are not going to support Israel going into these main population centers. So it seems like what they were doing, if you look at the pull up, again, always possible, I'll do my best here on the audio to give you kind of a geographical bird's eye view of what's going on. So if we have, got Israel, we got the Gaza Strip kind of in the corner of that, right? And then in the corner of that, in the bottom left corner of Israel, we have the Gaza Strip. But then in the bottom, essentially, if you're looking at the southernmost part of the Gaza Strip, it kind of goes, there's like a north-south border that stretches from the Mediterranean Sea all the way south down through the Sinai Peninsula and the Negev Desert in Egypt. And right around the middle of that north-south line that takes up, the part that's in the Gaza Strip, we have Rafah. So essentially what they did is they came through the Kerem Shalom border crossing, which is just to the south. It's on the southern border of Rafah or Gaza and Israel. They came in and they, did all this stuff that we saw with the tanks alongside the border. So they ran over the Gaza sign, all that stuff is apparently, trying to impact the amount of aid that's coming in. That's something that, as Biden alluded to there, is something that definitely pissed off Israel. But it really is remarkable and incredibly, it's almost... It's not almost, it's incredibly late. It's criminally late. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that, that the smaller weapon shipment that Biden has held up, according to, all reports. It's almost like you got to keep fact checking because you're waiting for the shoe to drop of Biden actually holding up weapon supplies to go in. And, Lloyd Austin has made comments saying they're worried about these weapons, used in Rafah. And essentially they don't want to lend their weapons to something that they said that they condemn throughout from the jump there. So, they say they will not go into the population centers, or they hope that they will not, and they will not give Israel any support through that. I'm not supplying weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of the Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like what came out in the Middle East recently. It's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons or artillery shells that have been used. So essentially saying, we're never going to cut off things like, the Iron Dome, but we are going to, really consider how much we provide them in the way of offensive weapons if they continue to do so. So really it is a big, big sea change. It's going to be something that we have to closely watch because, again, it was so many other times, so many other kind of concerned letters here that I've been, very skeptical of. And I've been right to be skeptical of because the other shoe was dropped and says, okay, they're actually going to support them after all. So Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin confirmed the reports that the U.S. paused a weapon shipment over powerful bombs as the state, as Israel faces growing pressure to stop these attacks. So let's get more into some of these comments from Lloyd Austin. Testifying before a U.S. congressional subcommittee on Wednesday, he said one shipment of high payload emissions, so this is like the bigger bombs, the higher 2,000-pound bombs, as we just heard in the interview clip, amid concerns about Israeli military's push to invade the southern Gaza city of Rafah. We have not made a final determination on... So they were very clear from the beginning, Israel should not launch a major attack into Rafah without accounting for and protecting civilians in that battle space. We have not made a final determination on how to proceed with that shipment of weapons, noting that the transfer is separate from a supplemental package of aid that that was passed for Israel last April. There's been some speculation that, this was redirected to Ukraine. I think that's a very interesting situation because they are a group that, isn't doing war crimes, and they need some weapons pretty badly right now. So that may have been directed to Ukraine. I heard that once, so I don't think, it definitely needs a lot more confirmation before I would believe it as fact, but it's certainly interesting. But it definitely does seem that they are, essentially saying you have not done enough to guarantee that we're going to protect civilians. It's going to be a pretty hard thing for them to prove, if you're going it by some sort of objective report, because again, we've seen the United States sit on reports of war crimes. The State Department sit on reports of war crimes by Israel from before October 7th even. So it really does beg the question, that how firm will they actually be on this down the road, and in terms of what constitutes a major kind of surgical operation, and what B constitutes the condition that Lloyd Austin gave here is what accounting for how to protect civilians, how the U.S. at the end of the day is the judge of how firmly they do that. So my final comment is that we are absolutely committed to continuing to support Israel in its right to defend itself. The U.S. making the determination there, I guess, that the invasion of Rafah, a full invasion into the population centers, exceeds, Israel's right to defend itself. So President Joe Biden is saying he can't. U.S. President Joe Biden is saying he is our partner. Can't say he is our partner. Excuse me. In the goal to destroy Hamas, while on the other hand, delay the means meant to destroy Hamas, said UN Ambassador from Israel, Gilad Erdan. So, Mr. Erdan, you are your own country. You have these things called factories and a pretty well-advanced weapons industry, at least if we are to believe your propaganda. I don't get, what it's so many different, kind of layers of BS here, because, the real truth of it is they should not have been committing this in the first place. But, don't we hear so much about how they have their own weapons and munitions industry, and they're like, well, we have no means to defeat Hamas if Biden cuts off these weapons? It's like, dude, just make some of them yourself. But it's honestly, don't, because we don't want you to go, it's just, it's really confusing, because it is, it's almost like this, the whole BS that, it wouldn't really matter if we cut off aid anyway, because, Israel doesn't rely on their weapons. Here is Gilad Erdan of the Israeli ambassador to the UN coming out and saying that without U.S. weapon shipments, they don't have the means to defeat Hamas. So, at least in his telling of it, they don't have the means to go in and kill a bunch of people in Rafah, is what the reality of it is. But, it has been a really drastic kind of policy change, and also revealing of, with this whinging and this throwing of hands and complaining, but also some real fear in the Israeli government, it is actually clear that all the enablers on both sides really were wrong, and there is a major role the U.S. plays in supporting this stuff, and when they don't support it, it really doesn't matter. Al Jazeera's Kimberly Halkett, reporting for the White House on Wednesday, said the shipment included 1,800 bombs weighing at about 200 pounds each, and about 1,700 bombs weighing at about 500 pounds each. 2,000 pounds each. 1,800 bombs weighing at 2,000 pounds each, and another 1,700 bombs weighing at 500 pounds each. There have been, leading up to this delay, significant concerns not only on the part of student protesters across the U.S., but within the president's own party about how these weapons are being used. Bernie Sanders said this must be a first step, as the U.S. must now use all its leverage to demand an immediate ceasefire, the end of attacks on Rafah, and the immediate delivery of massive amounts of humanitarian aid to people living in desperation. So, again, I think, we can map this more broadly onto my framework of U.S.-Israel relations and, public relations strategy in this war. Why is the U.S. doing what they're doing? It's because, Israel has violated that Blinken quote, that Blinken theory that we've referred back to on the show multiple times, which is, Israel needs to give the U.S. something to tell its people that they aren't supporting a complete, Nazi-level criminals that are just going around slaughtering people all the time. They need something to assuage the general public, and they are not getting that right now from Israel and what they're doing with their invasion of Rafah. So these bombs, we're going to hold them off. We could give them to you, but we're going to hold them off. I think if they put a little bit more effort into, a justification and give the U.S. something it can use, I would bet, because again, it's not like what Bernie Sanders said. It's not, the effort's not to find a ceasefire. It's to give Israel a way they could, produce this war or prosecute this war. I wish I could refer back to the original thing that, Blinken said to this Israeli official, but it was something along the lines of, just give us something that we could tell our people so you can prosecute this war. And they don't have that right now. So they're not going to send the bombs that will be, giving them a lot of political headache at home, and not to mention killing a lot of, people. They're not interested in ceasefire, but again, I would be inclined to place a pretty significant bet that if they, all of a sudden, something does come up to justify continuing support, that the U.S. can say to its people, this is why we're supporting Israel in whatever way, with this Rafah invasion, then I think it will be used and things will continue. Because again, after all, the support is ironclad. It's very important. So it is. Still, a lot of domestic pressure on Biden, 7 in 10 American voters, 83% of Democrats support a permanent ceasefire in in Gaza. So not really a surprise at all, but pretty interesting. So there has been some pushback already on this from Speaker Johnson and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, sending Biden a letter expressing alarm and concern about the decision to pause a shipment of shipment of weapons to Israel and ask for clarification by the end of the week. So that's going to be interesting to see how Biden responds there. And, if some of this pressure, I'm sure there's a lot of, behind-the-scenes lobbying that we're seeing from some more right-wing elements of the very right-wing dominated American pro-Israel lobby in D.C. So I'm sure we're seeing some of that. But, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how Biden responds if, buckles some of this pressure and ends up shipping those weapons and, is convinced, of course. But, that all depends on Israel's actions with regard to Rafah. Meanwhile, we have more comments from Izzat al-Rishek, who is a Hamas official, saying Israel is using ceasefire talks as a cover to invade Rafah and occupy its crossing with Egypt. Netanyahu is trying to create excuses and avoid negotiations by putting the blame on Hamas and the mediators. Al-Rishek, a member of the Politburo of Hamas, said in a statement, Hamas's acceptance of the mediators' proposal disoriented Netanyahu and put him in trouble. Hamas is sticking to its position that it conveyed it to the mediators. Earlier this week, again, this is the ceasefire deal. This position would see the release of Israeli captives in Gaza and an unspecified number of Palestinian prisoners, as well as an eventual end to the war over 3 phases. And here's the interesting part. CIA Director Will Burns has been in the region to iron out the agreement, so it's going to be interesting to see, if Will Burns is coming out, who's been really a big player, according to all reports, behind the scenes on this. If he comes out in support of this from the American side, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of pressure then comes on Israel to accept it, and if they're going to be really, kind of jump the shark and say, what, we're going to push on with this no matter what, and really go into Rafah without, the American backing and push past a ceasefire deal and really go for this, what would be some pretty serious, international isolation here. There's no other way of putting it. Anyway, they have J Street supporting the arms shipment, and hospital records show that at least 25 people were wounded after Israeli artillery fire struck a part of central Rafah, an area Israel did not call on Palestinians to evacuate in ahead of its incursion, just really contributing to an endless amount of fear and anxiety here. And Biden continues to get more criticism from this weapons cutoff, but is very, very interesting to see. Again, this pretty much all from Republicans. I'm sure John Fetterman will weigh in there, but it is very, very clear how much things have really changed when it comes to Biden and his, willingness to maybe draw a line on this, and we'll see how much he sticks to it. I think that limited operation is going, how limited that operation stays, especially in the U.S.'s eyes, is going to be, the key thing there for sure. All right, moving on. We are going to change tack to Congress, where public school leaders from New York, California, and Maryland were in session today, being grilled by House Republicans as they apparently largely failed to land damaging blows on Wednesday as they questioned public school leaders from 3 politically liberal parts of the country, accusing them of turning a blind eye to an alarming rise of anti-Semitism in classrooms since the October 7th attacks on Israel. So, at a hearing on, December, this is the New York Times here comparing it to the Harvard University of Pennsylvania, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, falling into a trap of relying on lawyerly answers rather than appealing to common sense. We definitely saw that with those university presidents just saying, no, calling for the genocide of Jews is not in line with our policies, but that has not happened, and we continue to support freedom of speech in our universities, instead of just doing whatever Claudine Gay did that eventually forced her to resign. Then last month, Columbia University took the whole complete opposite approach, and that didn't go well for them either. That helped stir further protests and eventually led to arrest on the school's Manhattan campus, prompting a surge in pro-Palestinian activism across the country. So here is the interest. This is the superintendent of Berkeley schools, Anika Ford Morthell, asking the same question, or answering the same question that, about the genocide of the Jews thing, but from a Republican who, I don't know his name, but here's how she handled that question that stumped the president of Harvard and University of Pennsylvania. Unbelievable.
Mr. Banks, does Israel have the right to exist as a Jewish state?
Absolutely.
Ms. Silvestri?
Yes.
Ms. Ford Morthell?
Yes.
Is the phrase "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," is that anti-Semitic?
I think most Jewish people experience that as anti-Semitic, and as such, it is not allowed in our schools.
You would say it is.
I would say it's anti-Semitic.
Ms. Silvestri?
It is if the intent is the destruction of the Jewish people, yes.
And it is. And so I would say I'd put you down as a yes. You're okay with that? A yes?
Yes.
Ms. Ford Morthell? It's a yes or you can just go yes or no.
It is if it is calling for the elimination of the Jewish people in Israel. And I will also say that I recognize that it does have different meaning to different members of our community.
I'm going to go yes. I'll put you down as yes. I got a boogie because 5 minutes goes by so fast.
Yeah, so kind of, I personally wouldn't be. I think the last woman, Anika Ford Morthell of Berkeley, kind of answered that the best because, it does, mean different things to different people. And again, it's not. I think it's much more important about what these people do in their schools, especially talking about public school, elementary school kids. They don't have to have perfect pro-Palestinian answers on every or superintendents. Sorry, they don't have to have perfect answers on everything. It's much more, but also about how they respond to parent pressure and what they actually their actions towards kids in the school. All three districts also serve diverse student bodies with a significant number of Jewish students. In all three, school districts have had to be really respond to highly fractious debates over what kind of behavior and language veers into anti-Semitism. And, they really apparently were practiced as well from the COVID pandemic, which seems to have helped, especially for David Banks of New York City. He made it clear that he would not be cowed by tough questioning. He said, "It's my responsibility to go before Congress to face this critical, complicated, and highly charged issue head on," he said in an opinion column to the New York Post. He said, "I will not only stand up against anti-Semitism, I will stand up against Islamophobia and all forms of hate. You can't put them in silos," which I think is a very well, leaderly way of putting it. A lot of people trying to say, we need to stand up against anti-Semitism, some of the Islamophobia left out of it. Banks responded forcefully at times to pointed questions from Elise Stefanik of New York, who had tripped up university presidents with regards to anti-Semitism. And he tried to do a little bit of a flip the switch with regards to Congress not doing enough. Here's how that went.
He's the consciousness. Really care about solving for anti-Semitism. And I believe this deeply. It's not about having gotcha moments. It's about teaching. You have to raise the consciousness of young people. And the challenge we have as a system is that we do have some adults who bring their own bias into the classroom. And we've got to figure out how do we unpack all of it at the same time. But the ultimate answer for anti-Semitism is to teach, to expose young people to the Jewish community so that they understand our common humanity. And I would certainly ask that my colleagues from across the nation, and I would call on Congress, quite frankly, to put the call out to action, to bring us together, to talk about how we solve for this. This convening for too many people across America in education feels like the ultimate gotcha moment. It doesn't sound like people who are actually trying to solve for something that I believe we should be doing everything we can to solve for.
Yeah, I think that's a point that pretty much anyone can agree with. Elise Stefanik, not somebody who's going to be a real fighter for, anti-Semitism and social justice. And some of these questions, just the exact same questions that they tried to, hit up the university with. Pretty gotcha. And, these hearings, not the way to do it. Definitely a very teacherly response, educator's response. You could hear that from Banks there, who's the superintendent of New York City schools. So a big thing here also was the discipline of student leaders. Carla Silvestri, the school board leader of Montgomery County, said In response, the school leaders essentially said, we do not shy away from imposing consequences for hate-based behavior, including anti-Semitism, but the leaders mostly tried to avoid broad statements about grounds for termination or suspension. In union districts like the one in New York City, there are often lengthy processes that administrators have to follow to pursue disciplinary action, as they should be. And Ford Morthel of California said her strict rules regarding divulging personal information can make people think teachers who cross a line are not punished, but she said that was not true, and action can be taken privately by the administrator. So again, it's something that I think this whole desire to take these local situations, blow them up nationally, and not acknowledge any of the context or things that may be going on behind the scenes for people that actually have done horrible stuff, or the members of the community trying to pushing back, stop people from being overly punished. I think that is best to be stayed within the communities, and it's something that has really not happened, and it's led to a lack of focus for what's going on in Palestine, which is the most important thing I think at this point, and also a lack of focus for real anti-Semitism, which is always a threat and is on the rise as well. Banks said that at least 30 students in New York City public schools have been suspended since October 7th, and roughly a dozen staff members were subject to discipline. The first time he had publicly shared specific details about repercussions related to anti-Semitic incidents. So, yeah, there you go. Interesting stuff from Congress. Speaker Mike Johnson, he had an interesting moment today as Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to take him out, oust him for his post, but some Democrats linked arms with most Republicans to fend off a second attempt by GOP hardliners to strip the gavel from their party leader. The vote was pretty overwhelming, with 359 to 43, seven Democrats voting present. Unlike the oust that toppled Kevin McCarthy last fall, Democrats flocked to Johnson's rescue, with all but 39 of them voting with Republicans to kill this effort to oust him. In addition to 7 who voted present, registering no position, 32 voted against blocking Greene's motion. And this time, Greene, who had supported McCarthy as Speaker, found herself on a political island. Only 11 Republicans voted in favor of moving forward with a vote on ousting Johnson. Greene's move came roughly 3 weeks after Johnson pushed through a long-stalled $95 billion national security spending package to aid Israel, Ukraine, and other American allies over the objections of Greene and other right-wing Republicans who staunchly opposed sending additional aid to Kyiv. And again, this is something that I think a lot of people are going to be mad at. I think really for good reason. You're going to have Republicans who are mad on it, and I think you're going to have Democrats who are mad on it, pretty rightfully so. But I think the important thing to understand here is the calculation that was made by the Democratic side, and it's a pretty smart, it's a pretty accurate calculation, is that Mike Johnson, as we have seen, is subject to a lot of manipulation. And I think it's clear that by the same token, Donald Trump is subject to a lot of manipulation as well. So if you have a majority that is the way it is, where you have a small Republican majority, where Democrats really need a lot of support, what they have done is, Democrats smartly, and would have been really great had it been for good or better causes. They essentially said, Mike Johnson, if you get enough pressure put on you, if you get enough, scary intelligence briefings from the CIA or the FBI about how much this aid is needed, then, you are going to fold. We're going to convince Trump to fold as well eventually, and it won't really matter that the Republicans have a majority in the House technically, because a certain number of Democrats are always going to come in and save you from any sort of political, and it turns out there's a lot of Democrats are going to save you from any political repercussions from your own side for just, essentially handing the Democrats the win. That's why, a lot of the Republican base is going to be mad today, because they're seeing you working with a Democrat, which has been verboten since like the beginning of the Obama administration, in any way, shape, or form. But the reason I think that a lot of Democratic base should be mad is that this wasn't for, some actual Democratic priority to make the world a better place that the Republicans teamed up with the Democrats on and beat out some far-right crazies. What this was establishment Democrats coming together with established Republicans to send more money to people, all around, to wars around the world, to conflicts that the Democrats are inflaming, the United States is inflaming. In some cases with Israel, you got actual war crimes. going on and genocide going on in Ukraine. You got no clear plan to give peace and give the Ukrainian people their country back after continued evidence that shows how the U.S. and U.K. screwed up a potential much more beneficial peace deal than what's on the table now with the looming counteroffensive by Russia into Ukraine and Taiwan. We'll talk about this. The situation with China is really making the situation is trying to essentially hold off from a battle that is looking increasingly like the U.S. is in a very, very poor position to deal with, and that is the bipartisan coming together moment that our people, the Republicans and Democrats, can come together, support somebody who literally has a app that he can share with his son, so that it gets alerted when each one, when either the son or the father watches porn, the other one. It's pretty much basically what I'm trying to say here. I'm a little worked up, but basically what I'm trying to say here is they enabled a right-wing freak to stay in power, a right-wing Christian nationalist freak to stay in power, who hates abortion, who hates any of these social democratic, socially liberal values, to stay in power so that the United States could continue to inflame conflict all around the world with no plans to stop it. And they essentially made the deal with that devil for that purpose. And I think that is something that is a very, very sad state of affairs in American politics, when this is the bipartisan effort, is to support things that really do not help our country, and also especially enable our country to enable hurt and cause hurt directly to many, many people all across the world. So really, really depressing stuff. And an important amount of, even though it's good to see Marjorie Taylor Greene take a loss, this was a coming together of the two kind of more establishment wings of both parties to send this money with no real plan to spread war, to spread violence, to spread American-made weapons to all corners of the globe. Okay, finally, tonight we have Joe Biden. The president, he has imposed some more tariffs on China. He is warning that a new surge of cheap Chinese products poses a threat to American factories. There's little sign of one in official trade data, which shows that Chinese steel imports are down sharply from last year, and the gap between what the United States sells to China and what it buys is at a post-pandemic low. But the president's aides are looking past those numbers and fixating on what it calls troubling signs from China and Europe. This includes data showing China's growing appetite to turn out big-ticket goods like cars and heavy metals at a rate that far exceeds the demand of domestic consumers. China's lavish subsidies, including loans from state-run banks, have helped sustain companies that might have otherwise folded in a struggling domestic economy. The result is, in many cases, the significant cost advantage for Chinese manufactured goods like steel and electric cars. So, cheaper costs, not only from government subsidies in, specific industries that make sense for China, but you also have the advantage of China having a lot of the access to some of the key resources for things like electric cars that are going to be so critical to the future. Forget, American electric cars taking over Tesla. It's Chinese electric cars that are taking over Tesla and doing it right now, and they're doing it very, very efficiently and effectively. And it's just something that, they are trying to spoil for a fight that they are in absolutely no position to win. It's been one of the few good things about the Chinese Biden presidency that that Biden has tried to build, a bit of this kind of alternative electronic vehicle manufacturing capacity. And I do think, I do tend to come from sort of, the protectionist mindset, or not, I would say protectionist, but the thing that, America has to develop its own, economy as self-sufficient as possible, and have things like, manufacturing in-house, and we have started to see that. But, I think we really need to go either one of two ways. I think for any sort of sensible policy, it's going to be a case where getting stuck in the middle, like what Biden is doing, is just trying to, raise the tariff higher and higher on what are increasingly more effective, cheaper Chinese competitive products. That is, essentially just trying to build off, a seawall for a tsunami. It's just eventually you could do it for a little bit, but the wave is going to get high enough where it's going to crash over that seawall. So you either need to really mobilize to put some investment, which I think would probably be the best, to put some investment into American green manufacturing, and develop that part of our economy again, or try and work with some of these companies and grow other parts of the American economy to work with China in terms of research and development and things like that, so that at least some American economy benefit is coming out of this. I think, just more investment on these green sector jobs is something that Biden dipped his toe into a little bit. But again, putting this policy in place, it may be the best thing you could do. But I think it's definitely not enough. It's not appropriate for the moment, despite it actually being maybe the only thing that is possible in the moment. But it's going to be very, very important to see. And I'm willing to bet that it is not, really enough in the moment at this point. It's kind of just picking or being a deer in the headlights again. In what is an oncoming, surging truck that is the Chinese EV industry, and it is really, really getting faster and faster. So the U.S. economy either needs to bolt out of the way and go get in its own truck to compete with it, or try and hitch a ride on that truck and grow some other sectors of the American economy along with maybe the research and development end. But hey, Biden already has started the manufacturing, growing it back up a little bit with the CHIPS Act, bringing more, factories back into the Midwest. Something definitely that we can do. But it really is. I think it's hard to see that there is the political will there to do it in a country like late stage America that we seem to find ourselves in at the moment. All right. All the time we got for you guys today. We will be back on Friday. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been Newsflash.